I was driving around my property when I saw the equipment. Concrete forms, power cables, full construction crew, building some kind of hydro station right where my stream feeds into the lake. Not asking, not calling, just building like they owned it. I walked over and asked what the hell they were doing. The foreman said it was an HOA project. They were installing a micro hydro system to power their neighborhood streetlights using stream flow. I told him this was my private property. My family's owned this land for 80 years. He shrugged and said they had approvals. From who? The HOA next door had found an old foot traffic easement to the lake and decided that meant they could build whatever they wanted. They never checked property lines, never applied for permits, never asked me once. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched them finish it. Poured concrete, ran underground cables, built their entire power system on my stream like they had every legal right. Then they flipped it on, sent out emails celebrating their new carbon-neutral energy initiative powered by my water. So I did something really simple. I opened the flood control gates, the ones my family installed decades ago to manage seasonal water levels. Completely legal. My property, my water, my gates. By morning, the stream flow dropped to a trickle. Their intake pipes were pulling air and mud. The whole system shut down, alarms going off, streetlights dead, their carbon-neutral initiative offline. The HOA president freaked out and called the county, claiming I was sabotaging community infrastructure. But when inspectors showed up and asked to see their permits and property rights, they had nothing. No permits, no easements, no authorization to build anything on land they didn't own. The county red-tagged it immediately. Ordered full removal, that $1 million hydro system. Dismantled piece by piece and hauled off my property at the HOA's expense. And me? I closed the floodgates, restored normal stream flow, and went back to owning what I'd always owned. Turns out carbon-neutral energy is a lot less sustainable when it's built on someone else's stream without permission. But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. The lake had been in my family longer than most of the houses around it had existed. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't communal. It wasn't symbolic. It was private water on private land, dyed it, surveyed, taxed, and maintained quietly for decades. My grandfather built it for irrigation and flood control. My father stocked it, stabilized the banks, kept the permits current. When it passed to me, it came with a thick folder of records. Water rights, shoreline boundaries, maintenance approvals, everything documented, everything boring, everything solid. The HOA came later. At first, the arrangement was simple. Their subdivision bordered one edge of the lake, and residents treated it like scenery. Kids fished from their side. Kayaks drifted near the shoreline. People took sunset photos. I didn't stop them. I never granted access, but I didn't object either. The lake had always existed before them, and it didn't feel worth starting a war over casual use. Tolerance turned into familiarity. Familiarity turned into assumption. HOA newsletters started referring to our lake. Meeting notes called it a community feature. Real estate listings praised lake-adjacent amenities, carefully worded to suggest access without ever claiming it outright. I noticed. I documented. I stayed quiet. Then the board changed. A new group took over, ambitious, image-driven, obsessed with sustainability branding. Solar panels appeared. Recycling programs launched. Press-friendly language crept into every update. And then came their proudest idea yet, sustainable, lake-powered energy. They pitched it as innovation, a small hydro-style installation to power common area lighting and reduce costs. Carbon offsets. Eco-awards. Maybe even a news story. What they never pitched was the idea to me. I found out driving the perimeter road I'd used for years. Survey flags dotted the shoreline where none had ever been. Fresh tire tracks cut through brush I'd maintained myself. A temporary access road carved straight toward the water. Then I saw the equipment. Crews, concrete forms, power cabinets, intake piping reaching into the lake like it belonged there. A pump station rising from the shoreline, permanent and unapologetic. I asked who authorized the work. The foreman barely looked up. HOA project. We've got approvals. Approvals from whom? He gestured toward the neighborhood. I called the HOA president that afternoon. Calm. Direct. I told him the lake and shoreline were private property. No easement existed. Construction needed to stop immediately. He sounded irritated, not concerned. Oh, that's already been cleared, he said. The lake's always been treated as shared. This just formalizes it. I told him historical use wasn't ownership. He laughed. We're well within our rights. Within a week, the installation expanded. Intake structures were anchored. Electrical conduit ran toward HOA land. Warning signs went up, not warning others to stay out, but warning me about restricted equipment. I sent certified letters, copies of deeds, survey maps showing the shoreline foot by foot. They ignored all of it. Instead, HOA updates reassured residents the project was fully authorized and dismissed concerns as misinformation spread by an outside landowner. Neighbors I'd known for years stopped meeting my eyes. Some asked why I was blocking something good for the community. The board framed it as progress versus selfishness, innovation versus obstruction. Meanwhile, the equipment hummed at the edge of my water. They never showed a permit. They never produced an easement. Never acknowledged ownership. They built infrastructure on confidence alone, the belief that acting official long enough would make reality adjust. Standing there one evening, watching concrete and steel reflected in the surface of a lake my family had protected for generations, I understood the real problem. They hadn't asked because they didn't think they needed to. And people who mistake tolerance for permission always learn the same lesson just later, and much harder. Once the shock wore off, I did the one thing they clearly hadn't bothered to do themselves. I asked for proof. Not opinions, not enthusiasm. Paper. I sent a formal request to the HOA board, asking for copies of any easements, granting access to my shoreline, any permits authorizing construction on the lake, and any documentation showing water rights tied to the installation. The message was professional, neutral, and direct. If they had the authority they claimed, this should have been routine. What came back wasn't proof. It was noise. They sent meeting minutes showing the board had voted to approve the project. A glossy proposal packet full of phrases like community necessity and sustainable integration. A consultant's letter referencing historical shared use without citing a single statute, deed, or recorded agreement. No easement, no permit, no right of entry, no water rights. It's just confidence dressed up as paperwork. I took everything to the county not to complain, just to verify. It took less than an hour. The lake was listed entirely under my parcel. The shoreline belonged to me, end to end. No easements, no utility agreements, no permits issued for construction touching the water. The clerk stared at the photos I brought. They already built this, she asked. Yes. She went quiet, then confirmed something worse. The installation they'd built required multiple approvals: environmental review, shoreline impact studies, water use permits. None had been applied for. None had been granted. Legally speaking, the project didn't just lack authorization. It didn't exist. I forwarded the county's findings to the HOA and issued formal notices: trespass, unauthorized construction, water rights violations. I gave them a clear deadline to shut the system down and remove every piece of equipment from my land and water. Their response came fast and hostile. The board accused me of attempting to extort the community. They claimed I was interfering with critical infrastructure. One letter warned that if I disrupted the project, they'd pursue damages for lost energy savings and reputational harm. Another floated the idea of seeking a court order to compel access to the lake in the public interest. Public interest. My private water. While the letters went back and forth, they kept building. Worse, they connected it. Power lines ran from the pump station into HOA conduits. The system was no longer theoretical. It was integrated. Every step they took made the violation harder to unwind, but they acted like momentum itself was a shield. At the next HOA meeting open to residents but pointedly closed to meet the board, reassured homeowners everything was fully vetted. They described me as an outside landowner trying to block innovation. Progress versus obstruction. Community versus selfishness. I heard about it later from neighbors who suddenly stopped smiling. What struck me wasn't the hostility. It was the certainty. They genuinely believed that enough agreement could replace ownership, that votes could outrank deeds, that decades of informal tolerance erased legal boundaries. Then, without waiting for any resolution, they flipped the switch. I knew the moment it happened. A low, mechanical hum rolled across the water, steady, unnatural. Indicator lights blinked to life along the shoreline. HOA emails went out, celebrating the launch of their lake-powered energy initiative. They posted photos. They tagged sustainability groups. They talked about expansion. Standing at the edge of the lake that evening, watching intake pipes disturb the surface my family had protected for generations, something became clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was occupation. They had built permanent infrastructure on my land and in my water without permission, without permits, and without rights, and now they were daring me to stop them. They still thought this was about arguing. Letters. Meetings. Opinions. They believed authority came from confidence and consensus. What they didn't understand, what they never asked, was how the lake actually worked. Why it existed. How it was engineered. What happened when the person who owned it decided to exercise the rights that came with ownership. They built a power plant on my lake. They were about to learn something very simple. Assumptions don't generate electricity. Water does, and I controlled that. I stopped arguing with them. No more letters, no more warnings. No more watching people who didn't own my land vote on what they thought they were entitled to. Instead, I turned to the one thing they had completely ignored. The lake wasn't just mine by deed, it was mine by design. Long before the HOA existed, the lake had been engineered as part of an agricultural water management system, controlled inflow, regulated outflow, Spillways, gates, and drawdown allowances clearly defined in my permits and water rights. Seasonal level changes weren't just allowed, they were expected. And every one of those rights belonged to me alone. So that night, I used them. I initiated a controlled drawdown. Nothing dramatic. Nothing reckless. A lawful reduction in water level, fully within environmental limits, properly logged, and compliant with every county and state requirement. By morning, the lake was lower. Not drained, not damaged, just low enough. The HOA's new power system went silent before sunrise. Their intake pipes designed with no margins at half exposed. Pumps cavitated and shut themselves down. Alarms screamed inside the housing. Indicator lights flipped from green to red. The hum that had rolled across the water the night before was gone. The system didn't fail. It starved. And because it had never been properly engineered, reviewed, or permitted, it had no tolerance for reality. By mid-morning, the HOA was in chaos. Emails went out about unexpected service interruptions. Common area lighting failed. Water features shut off. Charging stations went dark. Residents started asking questions the board couldn't answer. Why did the lake level change? Who authorized it? Why did the system collapse so easily? Emergency meetings followed the real kind. Voices dropped. Confidence vanished. For the first time, they were forced to confront something they had avoided since the beginning. They didn't control the lake. They never had. And the system they'd bragged about depended entirely on water they had zero legal claim to. Attorneys were brought in. Actual attorneys. They asked the same questions I had asked weeks earlier, only now the answers mattered. Where are the water rights? Where are the permits? Who approved construction? Why wasn't the landowner involved? There were no answers. Then came the inspections. Once the system shut down, county officials were alerted first by confused residents, then by panicked HOA calls asking for emergency authorization. Inspectors arrived and started pulling records. What they found ended the conversation. No shoreline construction permit, no environmental review, no electrical sign-offs, improper intake placement, non-compliant discharge design. The drawdown hadn't caused the problem, it had exposed it. That afternoon, I watched inspectors photograph the site, measure clearances, and quietly shake their heads. The exposed intake structure looked absurd, now like a machine stranded by a receding tide. That was the moment it finally clicked for the HOA. They hadn't built leverage. They had built a dependency. They had assumed the lake would always be there, always full, always available, because in their minds, it already belonged to them. But ownership isn't an assumption. It's a fact. Facts don't bend to votes, confidence, or slogans about progress. By evening, the threat stopped. By the next day, the calls stopped too. Their system was offline. Their lawyers were alarmed. Their exposure was growing by the hour. All because I exercised a right I'd always had. Didn't touch their equipment. I didn't step on their land. I didn't break a single rule. I simply reminded them of something they should have confirmed before breaking ground. If you build your future on someone else's property, they control the switch. By the following morning, regulatory attention had fully arrived. County environmental officers and state inspectors were on site, reviewing permits, checking water rights, and measuring the lake's drawdown. The HOA, still scrambling, realized they were not only exposed legally but also environmentally. Inspectors confirmed multiple violations: construction without permits, unapproved shoreline modifications, unauthorized intake installation, and potential impacts to aquatic habitats. The HOA's claims of community authorization counted for nothing. Every officer, every attorney, every regulator made one thing clear. The lake belonged to the narrator, and all activity had been illegal. Fines were issued immediately for trespassing, unpermitted construction, and environmental infractions. Notices demanded full removal of the power system and restoration of the lake and shoreline to their original condition. The HOA board members, realizing the extent of their liability, began resigning one by one amid mounting backlash from residents who had been unaware of the risk they were exposed to. The narrator took full control of the restoration. Shoreline repairs were made carefully, and water levels were gradually returned to their lawful balance. New access restrictions were installed, including signage, gates, and permanent monitoring, ensuring that the HOA or any third party could no longer interfere. The lake returned to peace. The HOA's infrastructure, once a symbol of their assumed authority, was gone. Equipment dismantled, pumps removed, alarms silenced. The community learned, quietly and painfully, that their ambitions had been built on someone else's property and entirely at their own risk. Final reflection: they had tried to seize control of water, authority, and progress. Reminded them that ownership isn't optional. Water and authority only flows where it's allowed. The lake, like the law, only obeys its rightful owner. And now it does so in peace.